One night, one message, and my life as a father changed forever. I never thought I'd be the kind of man telling this story. You see, for most of my life, I was the one protecting others. I worked in the FBI. I knew how to track people, how to read them, how to stop crimes before they ever reached the headlines. But nothing prepares you for the moment when your own daughter becomes the victim. My daughter, she was my world. She grew up stubborn, full of fire, always believing she could handle life on her own. And maybe I believe her too much. Because when she told me she was getting married, I didn't ask the hard questions. I didn't dig. I didn't check the man the way I would check anyone else. I thought, she's happy. That's enough for me. But I was wrong. I remember the first night, I suspected something was off. She called me late, her voice shaky, but she brushed it off. "Dad, I'm fine, just tired." You know how a father's gut feels? It screamed at me that she wasn't fine. Still, I let it slide, because I wanted to believe her. And then, the message came. It was short, just 4 words. "Dad, he hit me." My heart dropped. My hand shook. I read it again and again, like maybe I misunderstood. But there was no misunderstanding. My daughter, my little girl, had been beaten by the man she trusted. What would you do if you read those words from your own child? I drove to her house that night faster than I'd ever driven in my life. And when I saw her, bruises on her face, tears she tried to hide, I swear something inside me snapped. I wanted to break him right then and there. But she begged me, "Dad, don't. Please. Not now." So I didn't. Not yet. But I couldn't just let it go. You see, she didn't marry just any man. She married an alcoholic. A violent, unpredictable man who thought my daughter was his punching bag. And the more I learned, the angrier I became. Still, anger doesn't win wars. Strategy does. And that's when the FBI part of me came back to life. I started digging. Quietly. Patiently. Every record. Every habit. Every place he hung out. And trust me, you'd be shocked at what a man like him leaves behind when he thinks no one's watching. But the worst part, a week later, he came back. And what he did that night, I wasn't ready for it. That week felt like a storm brewing. My daughter stayed with me for a few days, and every time I looked at her face, at the bruises she tried to cover with makeup, I felt the rage burning deeper. She wanted to believe it was just one mistake. She told me, "Dad, maybe he'll change. Maybe it was the alcohol." I want to scream, "Men don't change like that. Not when they've already crossed that line." But instead, I bit my tongue. Sometimes, if you push too hard, your child only pulls away. And I couldn't risk losing her trust. But inside, I was preparing. Late at night, while she slept, I started piecing together his life. Old arrest records, DUI charges, unpaid debts. The man had a trail of destruction longer than he could ever imagine. And the best part? He was sloppy. Very sloppy. Then came the night he showed up again. It was past midnight. I heard banging on my front door. My daughter froze, her face pale. I told her to stay in her room and not move. I walked to the door, and there he was. Drunk, angry, spitting curses. He screamed for her, called her names I won't repeat. And then, he raised his hand to me. That was his first mistake. I grabbed his wrist, twisted it just enough for him to feel the pain. I leaned in and whispered, "You have no idea who you're dealing with." The look in his eyes, fear mixed with confusion, told me he realized he'd messed with the wrong family. But I let him go. Not because I wanted to, but because I had a bigger plan. And trust me, you won't believe what came next. The next morning, I sat my daughter down. I told her the truth. I used to be in the FBI. She looked at me with wide eyes. She always thought I was just some government worker. Boring, quiet, nothing special. But now she knew. I told her, "Sweetheart, this isn't just about one fight. Men like him don't stop. They escalate. If we don't act now, next time it won't be bruises. It'll be worse." She cried. She begged me not to get involved, afraid of what he might do. But she didn't know that I had already started the process. I reached out to an old contact, someone who still owed me a favor. I explained the situation, and suddenly, doors started opening. Within days, I had everything I needed. Surveillance footage of his drunken brawls, witness testimonies, even evidence of illegal activities he thought no one knew about. Piece by piece, I was building a case. Not just to scare him. No, I was going to bury him under the full weight of the law. But before I could finish, something happened. He disappeared. When he vanished, I thought maybe I'd finally spook him enough to stay away. Maybe he'd realized he was outmatched and slunk off to drink himself into oblivion somewhere else. For a day, I let myself breathe. For a day, I almost believed the nightmare was over. Then an envelope arrived at our door. No return address. 3 words scribbled across the top. He knows. Inside, a single photo, my daughter leaving her office, framed by headlights. Someone had been watching her. Someone was still watching us. That's when the old training kicked in full throttle. Fear sharpened into focus. I called in favors quietly, the kind of favors you don't talk about over coffee. People who owed me from cases long closed answer me in 2 words. We'll help. We didn't confront him directly yet. We didn't need to. I set up surveillance around my daughter's routes, changed routines, and had my contact feed me whatever showed up on those dark corners of the net where men like him hide and boast. It's ugly what you learn to read when you've been doing this a long time. Usernames that reek of pride and violence. Phone numbers that rotate like shells. One night, while reviewing footage, I saw him. Not in person, but in a bar across town. He was with 2 men I'd flagged months ago. The kind you don't want near your family. They noticed the camera. They looked straight at it, then laughed. That laugh. Like a warning. What would you do if you knew the man who hurt your daughter still had allies? Would you wait for the law to fix it? Or would you stack the evidence so high the law couldn't ignore it? I chose the latter. I started connecting dots that no one else seemed to bother to connect. Financial transfers, phone ping patterns, the little weekend trips that lined up with trouble. I built a web, and at the center of it all was him. And then, without warning, he made another mistake. A careless call. A boast in a circle that wasn't as private as he thought. That one slip, that single syllable, is what finally let me breathe again. Because sometimes, men like him forget they're still being watched. But even when you think you've trapped a predator, the unpleasant truth is this. The hunt changes you. Are you still a father protecting his child? Or have you become someone else? I had to ask myself that more than once. We started to move. Quietly. Methodically. I coordinated with a detective I trusted, someone who didn't need my past explained to him, only the truth in the files I handed over. We laid out the timeline, the witnesses, the photos, the recordings. I watched as the pieces I'd collected turned into a legal picture that couldn't be dismissed as he said, she said. There's one moment I'll never forget. The night my daughter asked me, with a small, fractured laugh, "Are you a spy now, Dad?" She tried to make light of it, to take back some of the fear. I wanted to tell her it was over, that the old life was closed for good. Instead, I wrapped my arms around her and said, I'll do whatever it takes. We didn't set traps. We set the law to work. We presented the case so cleanly that when arrests were made, there was no room for a cheap plea bargain to let him slip free. They picked him up on a weekday morning. He was still half asleep, surprised, still thinking someone would bail him out with an apology. In court, I sat there listening to the evidence read out. The photos of his rage, the testimonies of the women he'd hurt, the pattern that finally made the judge look up and not away. I watched my daughter during it all, not because she had to be brave, but because every time she flinched, I remembered why I'd done it. When the sentence came, 15 years, the room felt simultaneously full and empty. I didn't feel triumph. I felt an exhausted relief, like exhaling after holding breath too long. Did that sentence fix everything? No. Did it make the world right? No. But it created space for healing, for a life where my daughter could sleep without glancing at the window. Still, something nagged at me. Men like him don't always learn behind bars. They network. They scheme. And maybe, somewhere, someone was already waiting to pick up where he left off. Would you feel safe then? Could you ever let your guard down? I didn't know the answer. But for the first time in a long while, I let my daughter take a step forward. She started therapy. She took small trips with friends. She began laughing at things that weren't layered in fear. And me? I learned to be present without suffocating. To be a father, not an agent. But no matter how much I tried to bury the past, it stayed with me, a map of scars and lessons I could never fully erase. You'd think after the sentencing, life would go back to normal, that we'd just breathe again and let the days pass. But healing isn't a straight line. It's a maze, with turns you don't see coming. One night, maybe 2 months after the trial, my daughter called me past midnight. Her voice was shaking. Dad, I think someone followed me home. My heart dropped. In an instant, I was back in agent mode, scanning possibilities. Could it be paranoia? Could it be coincidence? Or was it him, reaching out through the bars by using someone else? That's the thing no one tells you. Prison walls don't always stop the reach of a violent man. They just slow him down. And when you've made enemies in his world, you never know how long their memory lasts. I drove over that night. The street was quiet, her apartment dark except for the kitchen light. I checked every corner, every shadow. No one there. Still, I didn't dismiss her fear. Fear leaves fingerprints, and hers were real. What would you say to your child in that moment? Do you dismiss it and tell them they're safe? Or do you admit the truth, that safety is never absolute, only managed? I chose honesty. I told her, maybe it was nothing, but if it wasn't, we'll be ready. She nodded, but I could see it, the question she didn't ask out loud. Will it ever end? The worst part? I didn't have an answer. Part 8. Weeks passed. Things settled. But one evening, while going through the mail, I found something that froze my blood. A letter, handwritten, no signature. Just one sentence. You took one of ours. We'll take one of yours. My daughter never saw it. I tore it up before she came by, but the message was burned into me. Someone was angry. Someone felt I'd gone too far. And in their world, revenge wasn't a theory. It was a promise. I thought long and hard about whether to involve her in this, whether to warn her. But I remembered her face after the trial, the way she finally started smiling again. I couldn't crush that progress. Not yet. Instead, I doubled my precautions. More cameras, more checks, quiet calls to old colleagues, asking for favors without saying the full story. Some agreed. Some reminded me that my badge was long gone. That stung, because once you're out, no matter how righteous your cause feels. But here's the detail I never told anyone, until now. That letter wasn't the first. I'd already received another weeks earlier. Shorter, sharper, just 2 words, not over. I hadn't wanted to believe it then. I forced myself to ignore it. Now I couldn't. And the question that haunted me late at night wasn't if they'd act, but when. It was a Saturday morning when everything came crashing down. My daughter was supposed to meet me for breakfast, but she didn't show. No text, no call, just silence. And let me tell you, silence can be the loudest sound in the world when it's your child. I drove to her apartment, heart pounding with every red light. Her car was outside, but the blinds were drawn. I knocked, nothing. I called her name, nothing. My training kicked in. I listened at the door. Faint movement, a creak, then a muffled sob. I forced a lock, and there she was, sitting on the floor, clutching her knees, shaking. She wasn't hurt, not physically at least, but her phone lay on the ground with a message still glowing on the screen. It read, "You can't hide behind Daddy forever." My stomach turned to stone. Someone knew. Someone was watching. And worst of all, they wanted her to know it. What would you do in that moment? Do you call the cops, knowing they'll treat it like an idle threat? Or do you take matters into your own hands, like I did? Because in my mind, there was only one choice. That night, I pulled out a box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were pieces of my past life. IDs, contacts, encrypted drives with information no civilian should ever see. My daughter thought she had a father who'd left that world behind. But the truth? You never leave it. It stays in your blood. I started connecting dots. Old names from the letter style. Prison gangs tied to her husband. It didn't take long to find a match. He wasn't working alone. He had a network. Men who owed him favors. Men who hated cops. Feds. Men who'd love to make me pay. And here's the part that scared me most. They weren't after me. They were after her. Because hurting her was the fastest way to break me. I sat in the dark, holding that letter again, asking myself, if I was still an agent, what would my next move be? The answer came fast. Surveillance. Control. Strike first. But this time, it wasn't just about a mission. It was about my daughter's life. And one mistake could cost everything. So, I made a decision that night. A decision I never told her. I was going to hunt them before they hunted us. The first step was to disappear in plain sight. I told my daughter to stay at my house for a while, just to be safe. I didn't want to scare her with the truth. I told her I was remodeling my place, adding security. In reality, I was creating a controlled environment where I could monitor every angle, every signal. While she slept, I spent nights at my desk, combing through databases and contacts I shouldn't still have access to. Prison transfer logs, visitor lists, intercepted phone calls. I dug everywhere I could without tipping off the wrong people. And slowly, a pattern emerged. 3 names kept popping up. All former cellmates. All with fresh releases. All living within 50 miles. Coincidence? No. This was a setup. What would you do if you found out someone was circling your child like sharks? Would you trust the system to protect them? Or would you use everything you had, legal or not, to end it? I knew my answer. I tracked one of them to a dingy bar outside the city, the kind of place where no one asked questions. I walked in, just another face in the crowd, my baseball cap pulled low. He sat at the counter, nursing a drink, scrolling through his phone. I took the stool next to him. Didn't say a word. Just waited. He smelled of whiskey and sweat, like the past I thought I'd buried. After a minute, he glanced at me. Recognition flickered in his eyes. He opened his mouth, maybe to threaten, maybe to run. I leaned in and whispered a name only he and I should know, one from a sealed case years ago. His face went pale. His hand trembled. "You're going to tell me everything," I said quietly. "Every plan, every name, or you'll wish you stayed inside. No yelling, no violence, just my voice. Calm, deadly calm." He cracked in less than 5 minutes. Told me about the messages, the plan, to teach me a lesson. Told me who was pulling the strings. And then he said something that made my blood run cold. "She's not the only one they're watching. She's not the only one they're watching." Those words echoed in my head like a gunshot. I gripped the edge of the bar, forcing myself not to react. "What do you mean?" I asked low and steady. He swallowed hard. "They know about you. They know where you live. They know about your ex-wife. Your grandchild." My heart stopped for a second. Grandchild. My daughter hadn't even told me yet. But apparently someone else knew. Someone who shouldn't. I stared at him. "If you're lying, I'll know." He shook his head so fast it almost made me dizzy. "They said you took one of theirs. They're going to take everything from you, piece by piece." I left him sitting there, shaking. Didn't even look back. Outside, I stood in the cold night air, trying to process what I'd just heard. Everything I'd done, every line I'd crossed, every favor I'd called in. It still wasn't enough. They were ahead of me. And now, there was more at stake than I'd ever realized. What would you do if you found out there was a secret in your own family? One your enemies knew before you did. That night, I drove straight home. My daughter was asleep on the couch, the TV still playing some late-night talk show. For a moment, she looked like a little girl again, peaceful, safe. And I hated myself for what I was about to do. I woke her gently and said, "Sweetheart, we need to talk." Her eyes opened, heavy with sleep. "What is it, Dad?" I hesitated, then asked, "Is there something you haven't told me?" She froze. Her hands instinctively went to her stomach. That's how I knew. She whispered, "I was going to tell you after things calmed down. I'm pregnant." The room spun. Rage, fear, love, all at once. I sat down beside her, took her hand, and forced myself to breathe. "I'm going to protect you," I said. "Both of you." She nodded, tears rolling down her face. "But how, Dad? They're everywhere. I can feel it." I didn't tell her the truth, that I already had a plan. A plan that would end this once and for all. But the cost? I wasn't sure yet. All I knew was this. Failure wasn't an option. I didn't sleep that night. While my daughter rested upstairs, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the letter again. "You took one of ours. We'll take one of yours." Now, it wasn't just a threat. It was a countdown. Every instinct had told me they wouldn't wait long. And now, with a baby on the way, the stakes had doubled. I reached for my old burner phone, the one I swore I'd never use again. One number still worked, a voice I hadn't heard in over a decade. "You owe me," I said when he picked up. Silence. Then a slow exhale. "What do you need?" I laid it out. The letters, the threats, the names. He didn't hesitate. "Give me 48 hours. I'll get you locations." It felt like the old days again. The adrenaline, the planning, the hunt. But this time, it wasn't about justice or the badge. It was about blood. And deep down, I knew, once I stepped back into this world, there was no turning back. 2 days later, I had files spread across my table. Addresses, phone logs, photographs. 3 men, all dangerous, all connected, and all watching us. I studied every detail, memorizing routines, weak points, patterns. Old habits die hard. Surveillance was my second language, and I spoke it fluently. But here's the thing. The deeper I looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about revenge for one man behind bars. It was bigger, organized, coordinated. Someone higher up had given the green light. And that meant one thing. Cutting off the small guys wouldn't be enough. I had to go straight to the source. I sat back in my chair, rubbing my temples. What would you do? I whispered to myself. If you knew your family's safety depended on ending a war before it started? I already knew my answer. I picked up my gun, checked the chamber, and slid it back into the holster. My daughter would never understand the choices I was making. Maybe one day she'd hate me for it. But if it meant she and that child lived to see tomorrow, I could live with her hate. This was the point where planning met risk. You learn pretty fast that the difference between a good plan and a good outcome is patience and a little luck. I had both contacts and dirt, but I also had to be careful. One wrong move, and this whole thing would explode in our faces. I spent days running simulations in my head. Who would move first? Who would protect whom? I mapped routes, timed routines, and even rehearsed being a harmless old man at the coffee shop on my team. A handful of trusted ex-colleagues took the streets. They were ghosts in plain clothes, checking exits, confirming alibis, listening for the kind of chatter that gives away a plan. There's a weird clarity that comes when you know you're fighting for someone you love. Fear becomes a tool. Anger sharpens into focus. But mixed with that was a deeper fear. The fear that I might push my daughter into a war she never asked for. Would she ever forgive me if I crossed a line and lost something irretrievable? One contact came back with a nugget I hadn't expected. The network had been moving money through a local mechanic and a small-time loan shark. Nothing huge on paper, but enough to tie patterns to people who were still free. That's how these things work. Not flashy, not dramatic. Small threads tied together until they made a rope. We set the trap around the mechanic's lot. My team would document, the detective would have the warrant, and I'd be there. Not as an agent, not as a vigilante, but as a father watching the predators close their circle. The night before the operation, my daughter found me in the garage, staring at surveillance footage. "Dad?" she asked, the word fragile with sleep. I had to choose my words carefully. How much truth does a child need to shoulder? How much protection is too much? I told her the simple truth. We're going to make sure you're safe. She nodded, trusting me in a way that cut me to the bone. And then we moved. The plan unfolded like a well-rehearsed scene. Cameras rolled. Phones pinged. Men showed up, thinking they were conducting business in shadows. They didn't expect a team, or the law, to be waiting. Not all battles end with fireworks. Some end in handcuffs and cold steel, and the quiet sound of doors locking. When the first arrest happened, I let myself breathe for the first time in months. But relief was complicated, because with each man cuffed, I knew the larger game hadn't fully ended. The arrests rattled the network, but they didn't break it. They were small victories, important, yes, but only parts of a bigger whole. The mechanic went down. The loan shark's ledger was seized. A few mid-level players were taken off the streets. The judge read out charges. The system did the rest. But then something else happened, the kind of thing that slices at you quiet and deep. My daughter found a message on a burner phone we'd recovered. Short, clean, threatening. "You win today. But the ledger has names. We will find them." The implication was clear. They'd lost this battle, but the war could continue in other ways. I felt the old rage rise, but this time it was tempered by exhaustion. I was tired in places I didn't know could hurt. I'd traded years of a quiet life for sleepless nights and the prickle of danger at the base of my skull. Was it worth it? Every time my daughter smiled without fear, every time she took a deep breath without flinching, the answer rang yes. There were nights I would sit on the back porch and smoke a cigarette I'd promised myself I'd quit years ago. I'd stare at the sky and wonder how different this would have been if I'd spoken up earlier, if I'd seen the signs sooner. Could I have prevented any of it? Hindsight is a cruel judge, but it's also a teacher. And of course, there's the legal side that I won't pretend wasn't gnawing at me. Building evidence is one thing. Making sure it holds up under scrutiny is another. The detective I worked with made sure the chain of custody was clean, the warrants airtight. We played by the rules because justice that bends breaks us all. Then came the hearings. Watching men who once swaggered into bars now in orange jumpsuits was surreal. The prosecutor's voice was steady, The judge's eyes didn't waver. When the sentence finally came down, 15 years, I didn't cheer. I sat back and measured the cost. My daughter's trauma, the gamble I'd taken with my old life, the long shadow that would stay with us. Would 15 years make her whole? No. Would it keep her safe now? For the most part, yes. And sometimes safety is the only thing you can give when the past is broken. At night, when the house is quiet and the baby's monitor is a soft beep in the other room, I whisper to myself, we did what we had to do. It's not a clean victory. It's a messy one, as most real victories are. There's something people don't tell you about closure. It never really comes. You think a sentence, a cell door, a case closed stamp will fix it all. But the truth is, justice doesn't erase memories. It doesn't erase fear. It doesn't give you back the nights you lost staring at the ceiling, waiting for the sound of footsteps that never came. My daughter tried to move on. God, she tried. She went back to her music, picked up her books, even laughed again with friends. On the outside, she looked whole. But I could see it in her eyes, the way they flicked to every doorway, every unfamiliar car parked across the street. Trauma teaches you vigilance, and vigilance becomes a prison of its own. And me? I was worse, because I had the skill set to imagine every possibility, every threat, every angle from which the world could break us again. Being trained in counterintelligence is a curse when you're a father. You don't just worry, you anticipate. You see ghosts in places other parents don't. One evening, while cleaning out the garage, I found one of the burner phones we'd used during the operation. Dead battery. No service. A relic of a war I thought we'd ended. I stared at it for a long time before locking it in a drawer. I knew better than to throw it away. You never throw away pieces of battlefield. But as I slid the drawer shut, I had a thought I couldn't shake. What if they weren't done with us? What if this was just an intermission? The detective called a week later. His voice was calm, but I could hear the weight under it. We've intercepted chatter, he said. There may be retaliation attempts. Not immediate, but planned. You should stay alert. My heart sank, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I asked the only question that mattered. How much time do we have? His pause told me everything. Not enough. That night, I sat with my daughter at the kitchen table. The air smelled of chamomile tea and quiet bravery. She looked at me and said, "It's over, isn't it?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to give her the gift of certainty. But I couldn't lie to her anymore. So I said the hardest truth, for now. She didn't cry. She just nodded, as if she had aged 10 years in one sentence. And I hated the world for making her carry that. Later, when the house was silent, I stood at the window and looked out at the streetlight pooling over the pavement. Every shadow felt like a possibility. Every sound felt like a warning. And for the first time, I realized something. This fight wasn't about winning anymore. It was about enduring. Because sometimes survival isn't a single moment of victory. Sometimes it's the slow, relentless decision to keep protecting, keep watching, keep standing, no matter how many shadows wait at the edge of the light. A few days later, the first sign appeared. It was subtle, but to me, it was loud as a gunshot. A car, dark sedan, parked across the street from our house 2 nights in a row. Different license plates, same driver. He didn't move, didn't knock, didn't approach, just sat there, smoking, watching. My daughter didn't notice. She was too busy trying to live, trying to stitch her life back together with laughter and normalcy. But I noticed. My training didn't allow me not to. On the 3rd night, I stepped outside, walked down the driveway, slow, deliberate. The man's silhouette stiffened when he saw me. I didn't wave, didn't yell. I just stood there, staring straight at him. A test of will. 2 minutes later, the car drove off. But I knew it wouldn't be the last time. And here's the thing. When you're an ex-agent, you don't just notice threats. You catalog them. You create timelines, probabilities, scenarios. I already knew the next step wouldn't be surveillance. It would be escalation. Escalation came faster than expected. It was a Saturday morning. The kind of morning that should smell of pancakes and coffee, not gasoline. I stepped outside to fetch the newspaper, and that's when I saw it. On the hood of my car, a dead crow. Wings spread, eyes glassy, beak twisted, and taped to its leg a note. 3 words, scrawled in jagged handwriting. She is next. I froze. The world around me went quiet, like the moment before a storm breaks. I wanted to tear that note to pieces. I wanted to burn it, pretend it didn't exist. But I couldn't, because it wasn't just a message. It was a declaration of war. When my daughter came downstairs, I forced a smile, handed her the newspaper, and kept the crow hidden behind my back until she was gone. She didn't need to see it. Not yet. That night, I sat in my study with the note on the desk in front of me, and I asked myself the question I had been avoiding. How far am I willing to go to keep her safe this time? The answer came quicker than I expected. As far as it takes. The very next evening, the storm hit. Not metaphorical, a real one. Thunder cracked. Rain lashed against the windows, the kind of night that makes people stay inside. Which is why the knock on the door sent every hair on my neck standing up. I opened it slowly. No one was there. Just a small box, soaked from the rain. I carried it inside, placed it on the kitchen table. My daughter, curious, leaned in. I stopped her with one look. "Go upstairs," I said, my tone leaving no room for debate. She hesitated, then obeyed. I opened the box. Inside, broken glass, a shattered bottle of whiskey, and beneath it, a photograph of my daughter and her husband on their wedding day. His face had been scribbled out with red marker, violently, obsessively. My heart pounded. This wasn't just intimidation. This was personal. Someone wanted me rattled, desperate, scared, and maybe for the first time, it was working. But fear and anger are dangerous twins. Together, they don't paralyze me. They sharpen me. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room, every light off, watching the windows, the doors, the shadows. My mind replayed the same thought again and again. They're getting closer. At 3 a.m., I heard it. A creak. Not from inside the house, but from the backyard. I moved silently, my body remembering training I thought I had buried long ago. Step by step, I reached the back door. I didn't switch on a light. Instead, I let my eyes adjust to the darkness. And then I saw him, a figure of the fence. Tall, still, watching. For a full minute, neither of us moved. Just two predators, staring each other down in the rain. Finally, he slipped something through the slats of the fence, a piece of paper, before vanishing into the night. I retrieved it with gloved hands. The message was short, almost taunting. 15 years won't save her. My blood ran cold. By the time the sun rose, I had made up my mind. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. This was escalation. And escalation meant someone was willing to cross the line. I called an old contact at the bureau, a man who still owed me a favor. I didn't give him the whole story, just enough to get what I needed. Access to certain files and clearance for surveillance equipment that civilians don't normally get their hands on. As the call ended, my daughter walked into the kitchen, pale and tired. "Dad, are we safe?" she asked quietly. "What would you say to your own child in that moment?" "Lie. Tell the truth. I went with the only thing I could manage. I won't let anything happen to you." But the worst part came a week later, and I wasn't ready for it. It was a Sunday evening. She had just stepped outside to throw the trash when it happened. A car screeched to a halt at the curb. Two men jumped out. One of them I recognized immediately, her husband's brother. They grabbed her by the arm. She screamed. I was already at the door, running, before my brain caught up with my body. Years of training took over. In 3 strides, I was across the yard, my hand closing around the first man's wrist before he could pull her into the car. "Let her go." I growled, not shouted, growled. He froze for half a second. That was all I needed. A twist, a shove, and he was on the ground, gasping. The other man bolted back into the car and sped off. My daughter clung to me, trembling. My heart was pounding harder than it had in years. I knew this wasn't the end. This was only the opening shot. After that night, something in me shifted. They had crossed the final line. They tried to take her. And when someone threatens your child, there are no half measures left. I told my daughter to pack a bag. Within an hour, I drove her to a safe house I had access to from my old days. No one knew about it, not even most of my colleagues back then. Hidden in the woods, off the grid. When she asked, "Dad, what are you going to do?" I didn't answer. I couldn't, because the truth was simple and terrifying. I was going to hunt. I still had friends in law enforcement, and I still had instincts most men would never understand. It was time to use them. The first step was intelligence. You don't want to fight by swinging blindly. You dismantle your opponent piece by piece. I traced the car from that night through traffic cameras. Within hours, I had a location. A rundown bar on the edge of town, the kind of place where men drink to forget their failures. I went there alone. No badge, No backup. Just me. Walking through those doors, I could feel eyes on me. The stink of whiskey, sweat, and cigarettes hit like a wall. And in the corner, there he was, her husband's brother, nursing a drink, bruises still fresh from our last encounter. I pulled up a chair across from him. "We're going to talk," I said calmly. "And you're going to tell me everything I need to know." He smirked, thinking I was bluffing. But then I leaned in close, and I whispered something only a former agent would know how to say. His smirk vanished, because in that moment, he realized I wasn't here to scare him. I was here to end this. I kept my voice low, steady, not threatening, just factual. "You think I'm bluffing? You think 15 years was an accident?" I said, leaning closer until he could smell the coffee on my breath. He tried to look away, but I tapped the table with 2 fingers, a subtle signal I used to use in interrogations. His eyes snapped back to mine. His pulse jumped. "Where is he?" I asked. "Where's your brother hiding?" He hesitated, took a swallow of his drink. "You're not a cop anymore," he muttered. I smiled without humor. "That's the part you should be afraid of." It only took one more minute of silence before he cracked. He scribbled an address on a napkin, hands trembling. "He's been planning something big," he whispered. "He wants to disappear with her. He said, if he can't have her, no one can." My stomach turned cold. I left the bar without another word. The address burned in my pocket. Driving through the night, my mind was a storm. What would you do if you were in my place? Go to the police and risk losing time, or go alone and risk everything? Every mile brought me closer to the old factory on the outskirts of town. Broken windows, rusted gates, weeds pushing through concrete. The kind of place people go to disappear. I parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot. My senses were electric. Every sound, every shadow, every flicker of light. Through a cracked window, I saw him. Her husband, pacing, muttering, a bottle in one hand and a handgun in the other. Everything changed that moment, and you won't believe how, because in his other hand, dangling limply, was my daughter's scarf. I didn't think. I acted. The old instincts kicked in, the ones that made me a former agent. I crept closer, silent as a shadow, analyzing every angle. One wrong step, one miscalculation, and this would be over before it began. I watched him pace, whiskey sloshing in his hand, eyes darting like a cornered animal. My daughter was still upstairs, scared but unharmed so far. That was all I needed. I had to move fast. I grabbed a metal pipe from the corner. Not to hit, just to make a noise if needed. The moment he turned, I swung it, breaking a stack of crates. The sound echoed like a gunshot. He spun, startled, but I was already on him. "You leave her alone," I shouted, my voice raw, filled with the fury of every sleepless night, every threat, every fear. He lunged at me with a bottle. I dodged, grabbed his arm, and twisted it behind his back in a move I hadn't used in years but never forgot. The gun fell to the floor. He struggled, wild-eyed, but I had the control. "Where's your brother?" I demanded, keeping him pinned. "I don't know," he gasped. "He's planning something, somewhere else." I didn't care about him anymore. I cared about her. I shouted her name. She froze, then bolted down the stairs. I caught her in my arms as she ran, holding her tight. It's okay, I've got you," I whispered. Even in the chaos, I could feel the weight lift slightly. But I knew this wasn't over. He was still alive. His brother was still out there. The threat hadn't disappeared, only shifted. And that's when I realized, sometimes, being a father means walking the line between the law and vengeance, and being willing to cross it if it saves your child. After the rescue, I knew I couldn't let my guard down. He had a network, a plan, and enough arrogance to think he could outsmart me. I went back to my old contacts, piecing together every thread. Financial transactions, burner phones, social media breadcrumbs. Each detail was a clue, each misstep a window into his next move. It felt like a chess game, only the stakes were higher than anything I'd faced before. Every night, I reviewed maps, timelines, and patterns. I traced his steps through bars, friends' houses, and even his favorite dive shops. And then I found it, a small, overlooked storage unit on the edge of town. Rental logs, a spare key hidden under a loose brick. My gut told me this was it. This was where the plan was being finalized. I didn't hesitate. I mobilized a minimal team, only the ones I trusted with my life. We approached quietly, using the shadows to cover our movement. Inside the storage unit, I found evidence of everything: letters, photographs, even a journal outlining how he thought he could disappear with my daughter. He had no idea I was once an FBI agent. No idea I knew how to read patterns, anticipate moves, and turn threats into traps. I took photos, collected evidence, and secured every loose end. The final piece was locating his brother, the one who tried to attack my daughter directly. That connection revealed the final part of the puzzle: the husband's escape route, his contacts, and the timeline he planned to use. It was all there, meticulously documented, yet completely vulnerable to someone who knew how to read it. And I did. The day had come. Every sleepless night, every ounce of training I had buried deep in my past, every anxious heartbeat, led to this moment. I felt the old adrenaline kick in, the calm chaos of focus that only years in the field can teach you. But this time, it wasn't about a case. It was about my daughter, the little girl who had grown up too fast, whose life had been stolen by a man I now hated with every fiber of my being. We moved at dawn. Minimal team, maximum precision. Each step was calculated, every movement silent. The fog hung low across the back roads like a warning, but I felt nothing but clarity. I had traced him. I knew where he'd hide. I knew the way he thought he could disappear, the contacts he relied on, and every possible escape route. Every single thread led to one place, one decision. I approached the front of the hideout first. My team was flanking, silent shadows in the periphery. The building was run down, abandoned looking from the outside, but I knew better. Inside, he had weapons, he had arrogance, and he had delusions of control. I felt a tight knot in my stomach. This wasn't a drill. One wrong step, one hesitation, and he could still hurt her. I paused outside, letting the silence soak in, listening for any signs of movement. A faint creak of a floorboard, the subtle hum of a generator, small details that would tell me everything. I remembered how my daughter's face had looked when she had been terrified, clinging to me, and my chest burned with a mix of rage and determination. This wasn't just about stopping him. It was about reclaiming her world from the fear he had placed there. I moved inside, each step deliberate, controlled, like walking on the edge of a knife. Shadows stretched across the cracked walls. And then I saw him. He froze mid-step, a bottle in one hand, his eyes widening as he realized he had underestimated me. The same adrenaline that had saved me countless times surged again, and I knew this was my moment. No hesitation, no mercy for the threat he had been. "Stay where you are," I said, voice calm but lethal. My team spread through the building silently, cornering exits, while I kept my focus on him. The air was thick, charged with tension, and I could feel every heartbeat, every breath, every instinct in perfect synchronization. This was it, the culmination of everything I had done since the moment my daughter had been in danger. The question wasn't if I would act. The question was how far I was willing to go to ensure she was safe. And in that moment, I knew, as far as it takes. I stepped into the main room, my eyes never leaving him. Every movement he made was slow, uncertain, like he was realizing for the first time that he wasn't in control anymore. His chest heaved with panic, his hands twitching over a bottle and a handgun, both useless against the experience and precision I carried with me. "You in this now," I said, voice low but unwavering. There was no room for negotiation, no room for excuses. He flinched at the tone, the kind of fear that only comes when someone realizes they've misjudged their opponent. I had been watching him for weeks, tracing his habits, reading the tiny tells that gave him away, and now he could feel it, every second. I had him measured, calculated, and outmatched. He lunged at me, bottle raised. I moved like I had 1,000 times before, not with malice, but with purpose. I grabbed his wrist, twisting, disarming him instantly. The gun clattered to the floor, and I pinned him against the wall. His eyes were wild, trying to comprehend how a man he had underestimated could dominate him so completely. "Where's your brother?" I demanded, each word precise, cutting through the fog of his panic. I don't know," he gasped, sweat dripping from his brow. "He's planning something, somewhere else." I didn't hesitate. My focus shifted immediately. My daughter's safety was paramount, and every instinct screamed at me to locate and protect her. That's when I heard her footsteps, cautious, terrified, but coming toward us. I called her name softly, and she froze, fear in her eyes. Then I held my arms open, and she ran into them, clinging like she hadn't in years. It's okay. I've got you," I whispered, feeling her trembling against me. Even in that chaos, a weight lifted slightly. Her fear was my fuel, and now it had turned into relief. But I knew the battle wasn't over. The husband was still alive, still dangerous, and his brother was still out there somewhere plotting. The threat hadn't disappeared. It had shifted, and I had to be ready for the next move. As I held her, I realized something fundamental. Being a father isn't about waiting for danger to pass or hiding behind rules. Sometimes it's about stepping into the storm, using every skill you've ever learned, every ounce of strength, and even bending the rules if it means keeping your child safe. And in that moment, I understood. Love can be sharper than any weapon, and protection can be more precise than any plan. She looked up at me, eyes wide, exhausted, and whispered, "You saved me." I smiled faintly, though my heart still raced. "No," I said softly. "I promised I would, and promises are meant to be kept." The house was silent when we returned. No sirens, no lingering danger, just the quiet hum of everyday life. But nothing felt ordinary anymore. My daughter sat at the kitchen table, hands folded, staring at her cup of tea like it could shield her from the memories of the past few weeks. I poured myself a coffee and sat across from her, the weight of everything we had survived pressing down on us both. I didn't know where to start. There was so much to explain, so many scars to acknowledge. Hers, mine, and the ones the world had tried to impose on our family. I watched her fidget with the cup, trying to make herself small, as if the house itself could protect her from the fear that had invaded her life. "You're safe now," I said softly, repeating the words more to convince myself than her. "I've got you." She looked up, eyes glistening. "I know. She trailed off, her voice trembling. "I feel broken, Dad. Everything's so messed up." I reached across the table and took her hand. "I can't fix what he did to you, but I can promise you this. I will never let him, or anyone else, hurt you again. We'll get through this together." It wasn't about being a hero anymore. It was about being present, listening, protecting her space and her feelings, allowing her to reclaim the sense of safety that had been stolen. I realized that the hardest part of being a father isn't the physical battles. It's the emotional ones, the quiet, unseen struggle to heal what has been broken. We talked late into the night about everything and nothing, about fear, about anger, about hope. Each word was a thread in the process of mending. And as the darkness outside faded into dawn, I felt a small spark of something I hadn't felt in weeks: peace. But I knew the peace was fragile. The scars, the memories, the knowledge of what could have happened, they weren't going anywhere. They were part of our story now, and it was up to me to help her carry them without letting them weigh her down completely. In the following days, I noticed subtle changes. My daughter began to smile more, cautiously, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. She started reclaiming routines, school, friends, small freedoms that had seemed impossible before. Every time she laughed, even briefly, I felt a relief I hadn't thought possible. We went for walks together, slowly rebuilding the bond that had been tested in fire. I shared parts of my past. Not everything, just enough to help her understand why I had acted as I did. She listened, sometimes incredulous, sometimes frightened, but always attentive. "What you did, I don't know if I could ever do that," she said one afternoon, voice quiet, eyes searching mine. "You already are stronger than you know," I replied. Strength isn't just about fighting back. It's about surviving, learning, and trusting again. There were setbacks. Nights she would wake, haunted by memories. Moments when she would flinch at loud noises or hesitate to leave the house. Each time I was there, a hand on her shoulder, a calm voice, a reminder that she was not alone. I realized being a father isn't about perfect victories or flawless plans. It's about presence, patience, and persistence. It's about being the person who never gives up, no matter how impossible the circumstances. And slowly, day by day, we began to rebuild together. By the end of the week, she laughed at something silly on TV. I caught her eye and smiled, silently acknowledging our progress. We weren't fully healed, probably never completely, but we were moving forward. And that, I knew, was enough for now. The weeks turned into months, and slowly, I began to see my daughter reclaiming herself. The fear in her eyes softened, replaced with cautious confidence. She started venturing out more, meeting friends, even laughing spontaneously, moments I'd thought were lost forever. Every small victory felt monumental. One evening, as we sat in the living room, she spoke quietly, almost to herself. "I feel like I'm starting to breathe again," she said, and I saw tears glistening in her eyes. Her words hit me harder than any confrontation with her husband ever could. Those months of fear, trauma, and uncertainty had left scars, but she was choosing to live despite them. "What you went through, it wasn't fair," I said softly, "but you're not alone anymore. You never will be." She reached for my hand and held it tightly. "I know, Dad, and I can feel your strength. It helps me feel safe again." Her recovery wasn't linear. Some nights, she would awaken with panic, trembling from nightmares. Some days, a minor argument or a sudden noise would trigger a flashback. But I learned to meet her where she was, to guide her without forcing her, to listen without judgment. My presence became her anchor, the steady rhythm that reminded her the world wasn't entirely cruel. I realized, in a new way, that being a father isn't about shielding your child from everything. It's about teaching them resilience, giving them space to heal, and showing up, even when it's uncomfortable or frightening. Every smile she allowed herself, every laugh she reclaimed, was a testament to the work we were doing together, to her courage and our bond. And in those quiet moments, I understood that the greatest victories weren't legal or physical. They were emotional, lasting, and profound. During her recovery, I found myself reflecting on my past as a former FBI agent, a past I kept buried, hidden from her for most of her life. The skills I had once used in dangerous missions and high-stakes operations were now tools in a very different kind of battle, protecting my family and rebuilding trust. I thought about the decisions I'd made, the moral lines I had crossed, and the weight of the consequences. In the field, you justify actions for the greater good. At home, the greater good is someone's safety, their sense of security, and the knowledge that they are loved without condition. I wondered, sometimes, if she understood the choices I had made. Did she know the full extent of what I had done to keep her safe? Would she ever forgive me for the secrets I had kept, the fear I had exposed her to by not sharing my past? One night, I sat on the porch, watching her sleep, and I allowed myself to remember, not just the missions, the arrests, the danger, but the reason I had left that life behind. It wasn't the work itself. It was the knowledge that one day, I would have someone like her to protect, someone whose trust and love mattered more than any badge or mission. I realized then that being a former agent didn't just define my skills, it defined my purpose. Every strategy, every instinct, every lesson learned had led me to this point, to ensure she had the chance to live without fear, to laugh again, to grow into the woman I always hoped she could become. I whispered softly into the night air, almost as if she could hear me in her dreams. "I'm not a perfect father, but I'll always fight for you. Always." Even as my daughter's laughter returned, I couldn't escape the shadow of guilt. It wasn't the physical danger I regretted. It was every moment I hadn't been there before, every second I hadn't recognized the signs, every silent fear she endured alone. Being a father, I realized, wasn't just about protection in moments of crisis. It was about presence in every ordinary day leading up to those moments. One afternoon, I found her sitting quietly on the porch, staring at her hands. I joined her, letting the silence hang for a moment. "You know," I said carefully, "sometimes even fathers make mistakes, even ones who think they're always prepared." She looked at me, curious, but not judgmental. I continued, voice soft, almost confessional. "I didn't always see the danger you were in. I didn't always notice your fear. And for that, I am sorry." Her hand reached for mine. "Dad, I know you tried. And you saved me. That's what matters." But I couldn't stop there. Trying isn't enough, though. I have to do better. I have to be here in every way I can, not just in moments of crisis. That's my promise to you. She smiled faintly, the trust in her eyes like sunlight breaking through clouds. I believe you, she whispered. That moment was more powerful than any arrest, any operation, any act of vengeance I had ever carried out. Teaching her about accountability, about the need to confront your own failings, that was as vital as protecting her from external threats. I realized the lessons of life weren't always about fighting monsters. Sometimes they were about facing yourself. Over the next weeks, I focused on teaching her resilience, strength, and trust. We went on long walks where I asked her questions about her fears, her hopes, her dreams. We practiced scenarios, not because danger lurked behind every corner, but because I wanted her to feel capable, to feel empowered. What would you do if someone tried to hurt you again? I asked one day, making her think critically without instilling fear. I'd run, she answered cautiously, but I'd also know how to protect myself. That's right, I said, squeezing her hand. Strength isn't just about fighting. It's about knowing when to act, when to wait, and how to trust yourself. We spent evenings talking about trust, in people, in instincts, and in yourself. I shared parts of my past in measured doses, enough to show her that experience can be a guide, not a chain. And slowly, I saw her confidence grow. By the time the sun set each day, I felt a quiet pride that no operation or mission had ever given me. She was healing, learning, reclaiming herself. And I understood that the greatest victory wasn't in the capture, the arrest, or the sentence. It was in seeing her smile without fear, in hearing her voice speak freely, in knowing she believed she was capable of facing the world again. I realized then that fatherhood, much like life, isn't about perfection. It's about persistence, courage, and showing up every day for the people you love most. Over the following months, I watched my daughter transform in ways I hadn't imagined. She began to assert herself more, speaking up at school, making decisions for herself, and even forming new friendships. Each small act of independence was a quiet rebellion against the fear that had once held her hostage. One evening, we sat on the porch together, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. She spoke about a new opportunity at school, a project she wanted to lead. "Dad, I think I can do this," she said, voice firm but uncertain. I smiled, feeling the weight of pride and relief pressing in on me. "You can, and you will. Just remember, confidence comes from preparation and trust. Trust in your instincts, trust in yourself, and never let anyone make you doubt your worth." Her eyes shone as she nodded. I won't forget. It wasn't just words. It was a lesson she was internalizing. I realized then that my role as her father wasn't just to protect her from external threats. It was to teach her how to face challenges, how to navigate fear, and how to reclaim her power. There were still hard days, nightmares, sudden anxiety, moments of anger, remnants of the trauma. But each time, she confronted them with more courage than the last. And with every step she took, I felt a deep satisfaction. She was no longer just surviving. She was learning to thrive. During this time, I also reflected on my own past. The skills I had honed as an FBI agent, surveillance, strategy, anticipation, were tools I had once wielded for national security. Now, they were tools I wielded for the safety of my family. But I also realized that living in the past, obsessing over missions and protocols, could sometimes keep me from truly being present. I had to strike a balance. The instinct and knowledge of my former life, tempered with patience, empathy, and presence in the moment. My daughter needed me not just as a protector, but as a father she could lean on emotionally, someone who would listen without judgment and support without reservation. One afternoon, as we were walking through a quiet park, she looked up at me. "Dad, you were so brave back then, but you're brave now too, just in a different way." Her words struck me. Brave wasn't always about action or confrontation. Sometimes it was about showing up every day for the people you love. Sometimes it was about forgiveness, about patience, about being willing to let someone grow at their own pace. I squeezed her hand, smiling. "You're right. Bravery comes in many forms, and it's something we practice together every day." In that moment, I realized that the greatest lesson I could teach her wasn't about strength in battle or tactics. It was about resilience, trust, and the courage to live fully despite fear. And as we continued our walk, side by side, I felt a sense of hope I hadn't felt in years. The hope that we could both heal, grow, and face whatever came next together. Time had a strange way of softening the sharp edges of the past, while keeping its lessons intact. I found myself reflecting on my life, the missions, the arrests, the danger I had faced as an FBI agent. For years, I compartmentalized it all, separating the man I was in the field from the father I wanted to be. But now, with my daughter growing stronger and more independent, I realized that I could no longer hide behind that division. I started sharing stories of my past, carefully choosing which parts to reveal. Not to glorify, but to teach her that life is complex, that courage isn't just about physical action, and that every choice carries weight. I told her about operations where I had felt fear, moments when I had doubted myself, and the times I had had to make impossible decisions. Her eyes were wide as she listened, absorbing more than the stories themselves. She was learning how to navigate her own strength. "Dad," she said one evening, voice soft, "I never realized how much you carried alone." I nodded. "And you'll carry some things, too. But the difference now is that you won't have to do it alone. That's what family means. We carry each other." In reconciling my past with the present, I finally understood that my skills, my instincts, my experience, they were tools, not definitions of who I was. My true purpose was here, in guiding, protecting, and being fully present for the person who mattered most. And in letting go of the weight of the man I used to be, I found freedom in the role I now cherished, her father. Meanwhile, my daughter's reclamation of her life became more visible every day. She returned to hobbies she had abandoned, took on leadership roles at school, and rebuilt friendships she had feared losing. Watching her interact with the world without hesitation or fear was a reward I could never have imagined. One afternoon, she called me over to watch her perform in a small school recital. As she sang, her voice clear and confident, I felt a swell of pride so intense it took my breath away. This was her triumph, her story, not mine. She had taken back her life, her power, her sense of self. After the performance, she ran to me, eyes sparkling. "Dad, I did it. I really did it." "You did," I said, embracing her. "All by yourself. I only helped you see it was possible." Her independence and courage reminded me that my role had shifted. I wasn't the protector in every moment anymore. I was the guide, the safe harbor, the reminder that she could handle whatever came her way. And that was enough. That night, as I watched her sleep, I realized the journey hadn't just been about saving her. It had been about both of us learning what it means to survive trauma, to rebuild trust, and to love without hesitation. My past as an agent, my actions, my fears, they all led me to this moment. And the most important truth was simple. She was free, she was strong, and we had both emerged on the other side of darkness, together. Life slowly settled into a new rhythm. The chaos of danger, the adrenaline of confrontation, and the weight of fear had all faded into memory, leaving a quieter, more deliberate existence. My daughter and I began to embrace routines that were both ordinary and extraordinary. Ordinary because they were safe, extraordinary because they were ours. We cooked together, walked in the park, and laughed at silly jokes in the living room. Every small moment carried immense meaning. I watched her grow more confident, more joyful, and more willing to take risks, knowing that even if she fell, she had a foundation of support beneath her. One evening, as we were putting away dishes, she paused and looked at me thoughtfully. "Dad," she said, "I think I finally understand what you meant about strength." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, it's not just about fighting back or standing up to people," she continued. "It's about facing yourself, forgiving yourself, and still moving forward." Her words struck me profoundly. I had always known that, intellectually, but hearing it from her, seeing her live it, was different. It was validation that the lessons I had imparted, intentionally or not, had taken root. And in that quiet, shared understanding, I realized something essential. The greatest victories weren't in arrests, confrontations, or punishments. They were in the hearts we helped heal, the trust we rebuilt, and the courage we nurtured. Over time, our conversations turned to the future, My daughter began making plans: college, hobbies, friendships, and dreams she had once been too afraid to pursue. She spoke openly about setting boundaries, advocating for herself, and trusting her instincts. Each plan she outlined was a testament to her resilience, a silent acknowledgement of how far she had come. One afternoon, as we sat together on the porch, she asked quietly, "Dad, will I ever stop thinking about what happened?" I considered her question carefully. "You may never forget," I admitted, "but you can learn to live with it, to take the lessons, carry the strength, and keep moving forward." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I think I'm ready to try." And in that moment, I understood what being a father truly meant. Not shielding her from life, not controlling her path, but guiding her through it with love, wisdom, and patience. My past as an agent had taught me strategy and precision, but fatherhood had taught me resilience, empathy, and the immeasurable power of trust. Together, we had emerged from a storm that could have shattered us. We had both learned that life doesn't grant fairness, but it does offer opportunities for growth, connection, and redemption. And as I watched her smile, filled with hope and courage, I knew that no matter what came next, we would face it, not with fear, but with strength, love, and unwavering faith in one another. The days grew warmer, and life felt lighter, though the memories of the past remained etched in both our minds. I realized that healing wasn't about erasing what had happened. It was about learning to live with it and finding strength in the lessons it left behind. My daughter had become a symbol of that strength. Her courage, her resilience, and her ability to reclaim her life were constant reminders that even in darkness, light can find a way. We started new traditions, small but meaningful rituals that marked our survival. Morning coffee on the porch, long evening walks, and quiet nights spent sharing stories became the backbone of our life together. Every moment felt precious, a conscious celebration of being alive and together. One evening, I found her drawing in her journal. She looked up at me and smiled, a smile that held confidence and serenity. "Dad, I feel complete, somehow," she said softly. I knelt beside her, placing my hand over hers. "You are complete," I said, feeling a swell of pride and relief. "And every step you've taken to get here, I've watched, and I couldn't be prouder." She leaned her head against my shoulder, and for a moment, the world seemed still. No fear, no anger, no past trauma, just a bond we had fought to preserve. And in that quiet, I understood that fatherhood isn't about heroics or victories. It's about presence, patience, and unwavering love. The final piece of our journey was acceptance, acceptance of the past, of our pain, and of the growth it had inspired. My daughter had reclaimed her voice, her confidence, and her joy, and I had embraced my role not just as a protector, but as a guide, a confidant, and a father who had learned that true strength is measured in love, resilience, and trust. We often talked about what had happened, not as victims, but as survivors. She shared her fears, her hopes, and even her anger, and I shared mine, teaching her that strength comes from facing emotions, not suppressing them. One quiet evening, as we watched the sun set, she turned to me. "Dad, do you ever regret anything?" I thought for a long moment. I regret not always being there in time to prevent pain. But I don't regret protecting you when it mattered most. And I don't regret the lessons we've learned together. They've made us stronger. She smiled, resting her head against my chest. "We've both grown, haven't we?" "Yes," I whispered. "And we'll keep growing, together." That night, I realized the full meaning of fatherhood. It isn't about perfection, punishment, or control. It's about showing up, every day, in love, support, and presence. It's about teaching resilience, fostering trust, and allowing someone to reclaim their life with confidence. As we sat together, I knew that the story wasn't defined by fear, abuse, or the shadow of the past. It was defined by courage, redemption, and the unbreakable bond between a father and his daughter. And no matter what the future held, we would face it side by side, stronger, wiser, and unafraid.